So we are going to be recording this. And we'll give people maybe just a minute or minute more, just to make sure that we've got people here. And Hampshire, UK. Whoa. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks people for sharing where you're coming from. That's wonderful. Put that in the chat. It's always curious to see where people are coming from and joining us. And the message doesn't change. The message doesn't change no matter where you are. Oklahoma, St. John's, Newfoundland. Oh my goodness. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started because we've got a lot of people that are here, and Andolin will let people in as we go along. So we'll just get to the next slide because we're not standing by anymore. But I do want to welcome you to our presentation landscape which promotes or helps promote pollinators. And just to give you a little bit of background about Pollination Guelph, we are a completely volunteer-run organization, charitable organization. We've been in Guelph and working in Guelph and across Ontario for about 16 years. And there's sort of 5 pillars that we want to get out there and let people know what we're doing. And it includes education, conservation, community outreach, research, and advocacy. And all of those areas need help. So before I go too much further, I do want to also let you know that Pollination Guelph is based in Ontario, Guelph, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Attawandaran and of the neutral people. It's covered by the Dish with One Spoon covenant, and we honor the original ancestors of this land and our current neighbors, and encourage you to consider relations to the land and the people near you, since so many people are coming from so many different places from across North America globally, okay, because we've got a UK person as well. There are some upcoming events. I want to just draw your attention to the plant sale. We'll remind you about this later on, but I mean, how good to combine this talk with the knowledge that our plant sale is coming up. This year it's going to be at Riverside Park on May 27th, Saturday, May 27th, from 12 to 4. Okay, not the first thing in the morning, but from 12 to 4. We're also going to be doing a summer pollinator workshop focusing on bumblebee pollination at CRESC, which is the Clare Road Emergency Services Center. And that will be on June 24th in the morning. And so we'll have a little Bumblebee 101, and we'll sort of be able to talk about some of the flowers that we've got there or that will be coming, and what sort of pollinators will be coming to that. But it's a great way to sort of a little open house about CRESC as well, one of our pollination projects. So today, and there's another little push for the plant sale also, with a little bit more information. The fact that we are going to be working together with the Wildflower Society of Nature Guelph, with Guelph Enabling Garden, Pollination Guelph, and also with Guelph Wellington Master Gardeners. So there's going to be a group of us that are going to be doing that. Don't forget, lots of wonderful books available for you to purchase online on our website. And some of them, this is one of my favorite ones, Pollinators of Native Plants. And for those of you who are interested in bees, this is a cute little one, nice little field guide of some common native bees for both Canada and the United States. And it's sort of a miniature version of this lovely bee document here, or bee book. If you want to check out what we're doing, follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And get a sign. Signs tell people so many things. So if, put a sign in your garden, because people will walk by your garden and go, oh, I didn't know it was a pollinator garden. And there you go. Look what you've just done. You've made so many people so aware. So welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you could come and to enjoy our 2 speakers. We have Adele Pierre and Kevin Butt, who are going to be speaking about, pollinator gardens from a landscaping perspective, and from how we can help, find ways to get pollinators in sort of those sort of more structured sort of types of landscapes. So we're going to start. Oh, by the way, don't forget this. If you've got any questions or comments, pop them in there. And by the way, Adele, Natalie says hi. Don't know if you saw that. So pop them in the chat and put your comments and questions in there. And don't forget to stay unmuted. But when it comes time for asking questions, we'll either check them in the chat, or if you want to ask your question in person, you're welcome to do that. Just let us know and we'll unmute you. And I think that's about it. Yeah, so try to keep yourself muted unless but we're going to get things. Oh, mustn't forget our sponsors. We've had some great sponsorships helping us pay for a lot of these things, and we depend on these sponsors to support these presentations, to support the work we're doing. And for this particular session, we need to thank Abood Associates, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a second, but also Be Sweet Nature Company and Origin Native Plants. And the wonderful thing about Origin Native Plants is they're a native plant nursery that's actually located in Guelph, and they offer a wide range of native plants to Southern Ontario and Manitoulin Island. And, whether you're looking to attract wildlife or add seasonal color to your property, they have some wonderful selection. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Abood and Associates, and they're actually really good because they're based also in Southern Ontario. They're a remote first consulting firm that unites the disciplines of landscape and architecture, arboriculture, forestry, and ecology. So they really work to make it a very holistic approach. And they develop solutions, simple solutions to complex problems at the interface of urban and natural environments. And this is an example of one of their plantings that they did, one of their designs that they did at Stone Road Mall. So take a look at that next time you're there. So without further ado, let's get started with this presentation. And I want to introduce you to Adele Pierre. She's a landscape architect. And Adele is acknowledged in the industry as a leader in eco-friendly solutions for landscapes. The firm regularly provides training for homeowners and businesses and landscape professionals in the use of sustainable materials, water conservation, and stormwater management through the use of native plantings. Projects featuring native plantings have twice been awarded the Hamilton Urban Design and Architecture Awards in both 2018 and 2022. And other projects featuring water management through the use of native plantings have been recognized with the Kitchener Environmental Awards and Landscape Ontario Awards of Excellence. So Adele Pierre enjoys getting her hands into the soil, experimenting with an extensive plant palette designed to provide habitat for pollinators. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn the floor over to Adele.
Thank you. Good to be with you this evening, talking about pollinator plants and pollinator gardens. It's a passion of mine, and I have a hard time. Controlling myself and keeping it to 15 minutes, but I'm going to do my best. So my little segment I called Landscaping That Promotes Pollinators and Keeps Your Neighbors Happy. Because perceptions, and I know Kevin is going to speak about this, perceptions of pollinator gardens is that they are messy. And I've sort of developed a technique where I don't even tell people I'm doing pollinator gardens. I design their gardens and I stuff pollinator plants in no matter what. They don't even know if they're getting them. They get them whether they like them or not. So I'd like to share a few tips with you tonight of how I do that. Before I start, I always begin talking about managing and sustaining two of our most precious resources. Because if you are growing anything, it doesn't matter whether it's tulips, roses, lilacs, or echinacea, they all need the same thing, They need a healthy ecosystem behind them. And we need to preserve, manage, and sustain our soil and our water. In Canada, we take these for granted because we have such an abundance. This is obviously a little, I'm just going to get rid of something on my screen. Thank you. Here's a little graphic of what your soil looks like. So these are the different layers involved in your soil. The humus on top is the stuff that's decaying. The topsoil is where everything happens and it changes from time to time. But the topsoil is basically formed by the stuff that comes from below, the bedrock, the weathered rock fragments, and the subsoil. You will have a certain kind of texture in your garden, anything from gravel to clay. If you live in Cambridge, you've probably got gravel soil. If you live in Dundas, Ontario, you've likely got sand. So gravel and sand have incredibly good drainage properties. The water goes through very quickly. You won't have a problem with standing water, but as the water goes through, so do the nutrients. This soil does not hang on to nutrients particularly well. The last one, the fourth one I'm going to speak about, I'm going to leave silt for a moment, is clay. Clay has these little microscopic particles and they're flat. We call them platy, and they literally stick together. And it's very hard for water to get through clay soil. But on the other side of the equation, clay holds nutrients extremely well. So once your plants get in there, they're going to thrive. Silt is between those extremes, sort of between sand and clay in terms of the size of particles. Silt is a little hard to describe, but if you think about a rain puddle, when all of the water has evaporated, there's some stuff there that feels sort of like talcum powder. That's silt, and silt is the most highly erodible of all of the soils. You can't really change your soil texture. You can find out what your soil texture is, and it's likely a combination of a number of different kinds of soils. You can dig in your garden, get a good scoop of soil, put it in a mason jar, fill the mason jar with water, shake it extremely well, leave it for about 48 hours, and the layers will settle out. Sand is the heaviest, so that layer at the bottom will be sand, then the silt, then the clay. So you'll have a good idea of whether you've got a silty, sandy soil or a clay soil or whatever, but you'll have some notion of what kind of soil texture you are dealing with. Now, garden loam, the stuff that you buy at the garden center and in the big black bag and just stick on top of your garden beds, is perfection itself. It's 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. So you can put that on your garden beds, but guaranteed the native soil is going to push up through the soil again, and you're going to have to keep putting it on. So it's not sustainable to just keep adding topsoil to your garden beds. Soil pH is another thing you need to know about. That's the acidity or the alkalinity of your soil. By and large, that is governed by the bedrock underneath. So there are some differences if you've got a grove of oaks or a grove of pine and you've got all of that leaf duff or the needles on the soil, your soil may be a little more acidic. But if you are sitting on top of the Niagara Escarpment, you are sitting on top of limestone, and your soil is going to have a high pH. It's going to be alkaline. If you try to grow rhododendrons, your heart is going to be broken. If you're in Northern Ontario and you're sitting on top of granite, the soil is likely acidic. You can grow fantastic blueberries in Northern Ontario. Now, we have people from different parts of the country and different parts of the world. It's very easy to find out what your bedrock is. It's easy to find out what your soil type is, no matter where you are. I will tell you that if you try to change the pH of your soil, as with adding garden loam to your soil, you're fighting a losing battle. You can't fight nature that's as big as this. So the first practice, gardening practice, is to work with what you've got. Now, there's one thing you can change. You can change the soil structure, and that's how the particles in the soil, the individual particles, are arranged in clumps, and soil structure can definitely be improved. So I garden on the Haldeman clay plain. It's just like it sounds. You could build bricks here. It's solid clay, We joke that you can work the soil for literally 2 weeks of the year. So after 14 years here, I dug a spade of this out. This was unimproved soil, and you can see that it's got a sheen to it. It's hard. I tried to squash it in my hand to see if it would fall apart or would form a firm ball, and it's a very firm ball. As you can see, there's hardly any air spaces in there and hardly any worms at all. In the bottom left here, this is a garden bed that is still clay, and the only thing that I did was plant intensely and add compost and chop up dying plants and leave them in the soil. And as you can see over here, I've now got a nice, we call it a friable soil. It's not frying like your frying pan, Friable. It's got more plant material in it. It's got more life in it, and it's got more pore space, which takes me to the next little topic, which is that you need to know where your water goes. So you can see this soil example here, that there are soil aggregates, but there is also air spaces in the soil. And when it starts to rain, those pores gradually fill up. So this is an unsaturated soil. There's still a lot of room for the air. Saturated soil is when the water fills up every air pore. And flooded soil is when we're in trouble, because we know 3 things about water. It runs downhill. It takes the quickest route possible, and it causes soil erosion. In fact, when we moved into our place, they stripped the property to put in a septic field and to put in the house, and it was all stripped in the fall. And over the winter, I literally watched all of the topsoil wash away. A dangerous thing. So 3 things to think about when you're managing your water is to soak it up, spread it out, and slow it down. And you are legally obligated to manage all of the stormwater on your property. Not only are you legally mandated, you have the opportunity to use that water to grow the plants on your property. This is usually the biggest cause of flooding in a residential property. If you are having problems with your downspouts, you don't know what to do with the water, you might want to consider putting in a rain garden. You can get a rain garden rebate if you are in the city of Guelph, and many other cities as well have a program where they will show you how to build a rain garden, how it can absorb all of that water, how you can use native plants to soak up the water, and they'll even give you money to do it. So it's worth checking into. This is Nina Marie Lister, a very fine ecologist. She works at Toronto Metropolitan University. She has an ecology lab there studying all about pollinators, all about native plants. She's a guest lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. This is somebody who really knows what she's doing. This is her garden, and it got her into a lot of trouble. This is in the city of Toronto. Her neighbors complained bitterly. They hated it. And so she ended up actually going to, she was charged by the bylaw officers, and she fought the city of Toronto over this, and they let her keep her garden. Now, if there had been this kind of garden at the back of her property, and there was a fence around it, nobody would have complained. They wouldn't even known about it. They wouldn't have cared about it. But because it was right in the front yard and in their face, many complaints generated. Some of you may follow Benjamin Vogt of Monarch Gardens. He gardens in the Great Plains. His garden aesthetic is called Prairie Up. He loves prairie plants. I sympathize with them entirely. I love his stuff. This is his front yard in his neighborhood. And as you can see, nobody in his neighborhood has copied his style. They don't like it. They think it's messy. He's got this wild and crazy front yard, which is fantastic habitat for pollinators. But obviously, it wasn't enough to convince anybody else, because as you can see in the background, everyone else just has these plain green boulevards. Now, to the point, he was frustrated to the point that he has now said, I need to come up with some other way of doing this. I can't just plant sort of whatever I feel like and make it very naturalized, because it's not going to catch on. And I would say to you, I know you're all here because you love pollinator plants. I would say that we have to be the ambassadors for pollinator gardens. We have to be able to come up with gardens that are aesthetically pleasing so that people around us will say, I like that. Can I do that as well? So we have more people involved and so we have more habitat for pollinators. So I'm going to be talking really about front gardens. And some of the gardens I'll show you will be commercial properties, but they're of a scale that you can understand. So this is a pollinator garden. It's right in downtown Hamilton in the industrial end. This one was a challenge because they did not want any trees planted here because they didn't want to cover up their beautiful mural. We couldn't put anything higher than 2 feet because it's at a busy intersection, but we managed to plant all kinds of pollinator plants in here. Some are cultivars of natives, some are pure natives. There's even some daylilies in there, but it's well organized enough that there's a number of weeds in here and it doesn't bother you. And people who walk by it think that it's beautiful. And so do the bees. This was about 2 months after it was planted. Absolutely beautiful. This is another property that's also down on Barton, and it started out with all broken up concrete and ended up as a very formal garden. And I wanted to show this one to you because the person who owned this property, who owns this apartment building, wanted a pollinator garden, wanted to manage stormwater, but he was really fussy. He wanted formal gardens. So it was a challenge, but we managed it. And we managed it because of a couple of things. And these are the key things I want you to take away. We have trees that give structure. These are narrow ones because it's an extremely narrow property, but also he liked the look of them. We have some small shrubs that give structure. And then we have lines along the edges. And once you have a structure to your garden design, you can get away with murder in the middle. You can put whatever you want in as long as you've got a clean structure that begins. So I'm going to say that for your pollinator garden, the first thing that you should do is use trees. Plant a tree. Trees provide the most benefits, both ecologically and also design-wise. Everybody likes a tree. They like to sit under the shade. They like to park under the shade. Look at those stats there. These are the keystone tree species for our region in Southern Ontario, but you can look yours up for your region. Take a look at the oak. It's a host plant for 436 caterpillar species. It's absolutely astonishing. When we think pollinator gardens, we think goldenrod, and that's a great plant, but it only supports, I think it's 143 species of caterpillar. That's pretty good. But you plant a couple of trees, half the battle is done. Use them in your design for structure. Here's a couple that you may not have thought of, and you might want to think about planting. We've got a lot of maples. Everybody likes maples and birches. Swamp white oak, absolutely beautiful. Prunus serratina, black cherry. Interesting fact about this, it's invasive in Europe. Who knew? Espresso Kentucky coffee tree. So the Kentucky coffee tree has the largest leaf of any tree. This one I'm asking that you plant suggesting that you plant a cultivar, which is espresso, because otherwise you get these huge bean pods, which some people don't like to clean up. Hackberry tree, look at this. There isn't anything else in this garden, but there's a lot of structure provided by this hackberry tree, edible fruit for both people and birds, and host to the hackberry emperor butterfly. Austria virginiana, hop hornbeam. If you need a small tree and you're under the hydro wires, beautiful tree that will support the downy woodpecker. Juniperus virginiana, eastern red cedar, supports so many species of wildlife. I like to use it rather than the emerald cedars as a green backdrop if there's enough space, because look at those beautiful blueberries, totally native, 50 species of songbirds, etc. Lots of wildlife supported by these trees. Here's another example of a native plant, Carpinus caroliniana, in a formal setting. So nobody's going to complain about something that looks like this, beautiful trees with native plants in the understory, and it will be habitat for the eastern tiger swallowtail. You can use shrubs for structure and habitat. I'm going to talk about more compact ones because, as I mentioned, I'm looking at areas that are more visible to people around you, to your neighbors, to people who walk by. Rather than just putting in a row of cedars as a green backdrop for your garden or boxwood or yew, these are some beautiful shrubs that will provide flowers and fruit and beauty. I've been using the witherod viburnum quite a bit. It only grows 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. The viburnums are a spectacular family. This is the arrowwood viburnum, Viburnum dentatum. Beautiful hedge, can be sheared to any shape and size. This is the variety Blue Muffin, not very far away from the species. I have 3 of these in our yard, and they become an absolute condominium for the American goldfinch when the berries are ready. Beautiful plant. Nannyberry, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but tree or shrub form, but it's up to 15 feet tall and 6 feet wide. So it also provides a great backdrop. And you'll make these guys happy if you plant any variety of viburnum. An interesting note, a side note about them is that very often the berries are left on over the winter. So the birds that hang around over the winter have something to feed on. A couple of small native shrubs, because as I said, many of our native shrubs are big. This is the bush honeysuckle. It's small, 3 feet tall and wide, little small rounded one, beloved by the bumblebees. I know the deer villa has been hybridized into Kodiak orange, Kodiak red, Kodiak black, you name it. It's easy to hybridize, but really, who hasn't got a corner in their garden for something as lovely as this? And another one is the New Jersey tea. The mottled dusky winged butterfly deposits its eggs on this plant, only this, and one other that's closely related. And this is one butterfly that is almost extinct in Ontario. So if you want to support the species, look at the flowers, the fruit, and the leaf on these. Absolutely beautiful. Shrubs for edges. I talked about putting a line along the front. The red osier dogwood is a native plant here in Ontario. It's too big for many properties, but there's a nice little small variety, Kelsey dogwood, 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. I've used this a lot, massing as a ground cover, but also as a hedge at the front of a property. Another one, the black chokeberry, a native plant, and a very similar cultivar. It's just a dwarf version, 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide, again, to border a bed. It looks absolutely beautiful, and it's going to provide pollinator habitat, if not as much as the larger version, certainly more than a boxwood hedge or a spirea hedge. I'm going to briefly show you some designs that I'm working on currently. So this is down in the industrial end of Hamilton. Again, this is on Barton East, Barton and Milton. This is part of the branch of the Hamilton Public Library, and this is what it looks like now. It's pretty daunting, pretty challenging. The far end of it, we have a transformer, we have a box for the traffic lights, we have a hydro pole, all kinds of crap down there. There's a handicap ramp that goes here. There's an entrance to, just at the end here, there's an entrance to the parking lot. You can see people run over the edge of it all the time. Quite challenging, but here's what I've done with it. So I just wanted to show you a few things. We already have four trees on site, 2 of them in good condition, 2 of them very poor. This is a Quonset cherry. This is a maple that's not doing well. But I've done a little bit of structure with a couple of small Thuya occidentalis or eastern white cedar across your Danica cedar. I've used the New Jersey tea, which is the straight species, as structure in this corner, this corner. I've taken the Kelsey dogwood and put it against the edge of the handicap ramp. And then I start to build my edges. So I've got a path through the garden here. I've got a couple of places to sit, but along here, as a barrier, rather than shrubs, I've put an entire line of Rudbeckia, and right behind it, a line of little blue stem. I think this one is Blue Paradise. If you use the straight species of little blue stem, you'll be picking it out of everywhere. And on this edge where the driveway is, I've used a sage, another type of Rudbeckia here, and just straight ground cover, not native, just a juniper that's going to take snow loads and salt. Another grass along here. So I've got all my edges, a little bit of catmint. And then in the middle, I have all kinds of stuff. I have some liatris. I have some echinacea. I have lots of Geum trifolium. I don't know if you know some of these botanical names. Maybe I'll use common names. I've got hairy beard tongue, woodland phlox, whitewood aster, smooth aster, New England aster, all full. But it's going to look tidy because I've got these edges around it and I've got some structure. The area where the utility box is and all of the rest of that, I've just gone with straight ground cover, sedums and thymes. Here's another one that's very similar. This is in front of a condominium. Right now, it's just grass. So we have in this front area already a couple of maple trees, and they're Armstrong maples, so they're good for pollinator habitat. Remember, trees are the best for pollinators. I've added some more structure. So I've got a couple of service berries in the corner. I've got some hydrangeas to provide structure and hide the air conditioners and the vents. A couple of evergreens in the corner. And then once again, I've got some Rudbeckia, some grasses, low-lying around the fire hydrant, grasses, Rudbeckia, little blue stem, lots of stuff to give it color. So this is just the beginnings of a rendering, but you can see that even though there's a ton of stuff in there, there's panicum. I've got 3 kinds of native plants: the switchgrass, the prairie drop seed, and the little blue stem. Many varieties of perennials, but it looks structured so that when somebody walks by it, they're not going to say that's a mess. They're going to say, okay, that looks good. That looks organized. It's very interesting that for a child, the strongest thing that affects a child visually is color. For adults, it's line. You want to create lines, and you want to create a lot of repetition of the same plant. If you plant one here, one here, one here, one here, it looks like a mess. Make sure that you are giving people clear lines with your planting so it's articulate and they can understand what you're doing. There are some of the plants that I used in this particular planting. Sometimes I'll use a smaller variety of anise hyssop, for instance, blue boa, instead of the straight species, just because it's a little lower. I'll often use the gold stern, black-eyed Susan, rather than the Rudbeckia hirta, which is our true native, because that one has to be planted pretty much every year. But we've got a lot of color and variety in a planting like that. The back of this property is a gigantic swale, and this is where I went nuts with a lot of native plantings. So again, you can see that stuff is clustered. I did use a couple of big hostas there because they do take up space, but in between, I've got zigzag goldenrod, plantings of goldenrod. You can see that there are swaths and lines of plantings. So even though there's a lot of different plants there, there is an organization to the planting. I hope that's been helpful to you. I tried to keep it relatively brief. A word of caution: nothing is maintenance free. So this is one of my plantings at home. And this garden bed was full of echinacea and Rudbeckia and Joe Pye weed and milkweed and all kinds of amazing stuff. And for 2 years, I was too busy to tend to this bed. and the whole thing has been taken over by goldenrod, and I'm never getting it back. So no matter what you put in, there is no easy way of keeping a garden. If people call a native plant garden maintenance free, that is not true. By very definition, if it's a garden, you have to watch for the thugs, and you have to watch for the ones that aren't doing particularly well. The ones that aren't doing well, get rid of them. Just a little story. The Liatris spicata, or the blazing star, I love that plant. I love it. It will not grow in my garden at all. I've tried it 6 times. The one that I showed you with the bee on down on Barton Street, it's very nice. It's very well behaved. It grows 18 inches tall, maybe 2 feet tops. Another planting that we have on an even busier street, it's almost 5 feet tall, and we're going to get in trouble with the city because it's in front of a bus stop. So keep an eye on your plantings. There's no easy way. Number 1, plant a tree. Number 2, use your shrubs for structure and create a line. And then the middle, jam with whatever you feel like. But make sure you plant quite a few of them so that it makes sense to whoever's looking. Thanks.
Oh, Adele, that was just wonderful. The thing is, I don't think I put 2 and 2 together about the fact that structure is so important to create that, appealing, adult appealing pollinator garden. So thank you very much for sharing that. We're going to have questions for Adele and Kevin after Kevin's finished his presentation. And so I'm going to introduce Kevin very quickly, and let me just get my little slide up here so that you can see. And Kevin sent me 2 wonderful pictures. Absolutely, just love them. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Kevin. He is a terrestrial ecologist and a consulting arborist that has been practicing for 23 years. He's got a lot of experience under his belt. He works on behalf of public development projects for roads, bridges, infrastructure, water, wastewater improvements, and private land development, so including severances and residential, commercial, and institutional. He's been involved and continues to be involved in a number of nature groups, including Nature Guelph, Rare Charitable Research Reserve, and Pollination Guelph. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Kevin take the floor, and he can share with us some of his insights into what makes what we can do to have a good pollinator garden.
Thanks, Corinne. I'm just going to share my screen.
And it did take a minute to come when we did it last time. So as long as you should be able to share it without any problem. There it is. I see it's coming now.
We're good now, Corinne.
We're absolutely good. It's beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for the introduction. And although Adele and I didn't compare notes before the presentation, I think our minds are in the same place and very reflective. So I'm going to be speaking about people-friendly pollinator gardens and understanding the aesthetics associated with it, because how you design and manage your space will influence how your neighbors and passersby will perceive you, and naturalization for the sake of pollinators. If they like what they see, they may join the movement, or if they don't, they're going to hate you. All right, so here's the agenda of what I'll be going through. First of all, some background. Lawns, what are they good for? Things that are different can be scary for people, plant-wise. Some cues to care, to show intent with how we plant things and manage our space. And then planning our pollinator pockets, and then some species recommendations. I always love how we can share our favorites. All right. In terms of creating pollinator landscapes, they're totally worth it. As a restoration ecologist, I realize I'm not going to be building the big overpasses like we see in Banff that allow moose and bears going over and having all these great full ecosystems, but it's actually really easy when you think on the pollinator scale. So it's it can be really rewarding that way to do this on the micro scale. In some cases, I use the ecosystem restoration / enhancement interchangeably. I have a favorite to use tall grass prairie plants. However, those didn't occur in my area of Guelph, but that's okay. It's my space and I can do what I want. I do use native plants though. So the great thing about, more great things about pollinator landscapes is you break the monotony and you bring beauty to your neighborhood. Very similar to the picture that Adele showed of the sort of the green monotony of Sprallerbia. There's an opportunity to bring excitement with a dynamic garden. I'm not going to talk about all the great environmental things we all know about that: reduced water use, greenhouse gas reduction. Okay, so now the human element that we do need to consider. So what are lawns good for? Well, what I call the eye rolling values. So a mowed grass in front of your yard used to be something that you would see associated with castles. I'm glad we've got somebody from the UK on this presentation too. So that sort of feeling of aristocracy and having the commons that the peasants would be able to graze their cattle on has potentially been carried forward as the desire for having a lawn in front of our house. There's maybe something even baked into our DNA about being afraid of predators, whether that'll be millions of years. So if we think about if we want to keep geese away from ponds and lake fronts, we let the natural plants grow. So that's unsettling for wild animals, and maybe it harkens back to our wild animal days when we were a little bit wilder, even our teenage years potentially. So the other thing of this legacy of, well, that's just how things are done. You get a house, you get silverware, you get fancy dishes, and you get a mowed grass, and you're not supposed to question that. There's still some of that comfort in achieving that as part of being a homeowner. And then the last one is, I call it old man babysitting. And it's when, this is my own perspective, I see a lot of older gentlemen, they don't really know what to do with themselves. So there's nothing like getting on their lawn tractor and spending the afternoon or way too much time just mowing lawns. And this is somehow perceived as being helpful to the family and contributing while others do other things inside, like feed and clean and stuff. So this is maybe a perceived contribution. Understanding that lawns actually do give some goodness and do have value, and obviously kids and pets and amenity space is needed for lawns. All right, yikes, that's different. So I've got a typical picture on the top here that shows a mature street tree. I am a certified arborist, and a lot of the stuff that comes out in our periodicals is value of trees. And that's even a financial value, getting aside from the environmental goods and services. So there's some good hard numbers that come out of property valuation that says trees are so great, whether they're on your property or not, they're adding value of 3 to 15% to the property value. So that makes you wonder, well, is there a flip side to this? And everybody loves trees. Not everybody's gonna like potentially our landscape. So is there a perceived reduction of property value that's maybe even tangible related to how we manage our space? So some of the things that I thought right away in terms of that are working against you. Well, yellow jackets, everybody hates these come late summer into the fall, and they're those flying jerks that spoil the fun for everyone. And aren't those bees, and aren't those all the same thing, right? So we've got this nasty perception of bees interchangeable with wasps, interchangeable with hornets, and everybody's had bad experiences with them. Anyway, so why would you attract those to your yard and maybe my yard too? And then the idea of a healthy lawn, that means you're a great gardener, right? Because you know how to tend to the outdoors. Then Adele brought up this idea of messiness. So there's naturalization and then there's neglect. And we all experience those lots that we've walked by where whether it's an absentee landlord or tenants that just don't give a darn, and things just are left to go. Potentially somebody that doesn't appreciate plants, like everybody on this presentation right now, audience included, might see those things as interchangeable. So we just have to be cautious of that. So some of the ways that we get around those are cues to care. So what intentful things can we do to our site that say, yeah, I want it to look like this. I mean for it to look like this. So messy is sexy. That's a term that we used in ecosystem restoration, but it's not to everybody. So some of the things that you can do to appease neighbors and passersby, having some grass. There was a gentleman, Henry Cope, from the University of Guelph Arboretum, and he had the favorite quote of mine is, "People know you're a good gardener if you have some grass." So he claimed that he kept 1 square meter of grass that he mowed to prove to his neighbors that despite all the craziness that was happening in his yard, that was very intentful, that he knew how to take care of his yard. Stay away from weeds and weedy looking things. Height, yeah, definitely be reasonable, but it's okay to have some taller accents. Seasonal varieties and colors, keep that color going through. I mean, some of our native plants take a long time to wake up after the winter. So think about injecting some early bloomers and sometimes going outside of the native plant palette. Signage, of course, I made a plug for Pollination Guelph. I've got one of these I proudly have on my front yard. So that's at the top picture. Keeping in mind setbacks from neighbors and public amenities. Native plants are great at spreading, and as soon as they start going into neighbors' yards, they can cause some friction. By public amenities, I mean sidewalks generally. Obviously, if people have to move out of the way on their sidewalk, if they're walking side by side, they're not going to appreciate. And then Adele had some good pictures with fire hydrants, utility pedestals, things like that. We do need to be mindful of that. Access is required for these things. Groupings are important, just like the lines that were mentioned earlier. Have some breaks and paths and rocks just to break up that structure. And mix some familiar plants in with some weird stuff. And I'm going to come back to that too. All right, so in terms of planning your pollinator pocket, there's this wonderful book that Pollination Guelph, I'm hoping, I didn't see it on the list, but it's absolutely amazing. We sold it at one point, called Tracking Native Pollinators by the Xerces Society. And it gave this magical number of 10 species is the minimum for a good foundation when you're considering inviting pollinators to your property. And that growth is exponential until you hit 20. I mean, there's a law of diminishing returns. Is there still value in adding more plants? Absolutely, but there's that really sweet spot. And if we're focusing on having groupings in our front yard, 20 is pretty ambitious. All right, I'm going to make some plugs for where to get the native plants. There's this plant sale. I mean, if we tell you 2 or 3 times, you're going to remember, and you're going to come out to the sale. So that's May 27th. On May 20th, the week before, Native Plant Society is North American Native Plant Society is having their sale at the Toronto Botanical Gardens. Origin was mentioned, also Hollow Farms and Native Plant Sources in Breslau, just outside of Kitchener. Does it have to be native? Well, gardening is as purist as you want it to be. So I have bulbs because I need that early season color. Herbs are absolutely important. Again, those are those Familiar plants, but inviting dill and lavender into your garden is great for your own home use as well as the pollinators. Fruits and veggies, shrubs and trees, and quasi-natives. I mentioned quasi-natives, things like blanket flower. We have a lot of, sometimes the garden centers or the box stores will consider native plants something that all of Canada can grow. So we do have to be mindful of that. And again, designing your space is as purist as you want it to be. All right. So in terms of normal plants for your neighbors, so this is an opportunity for the neighbors to look at your property and say, hey, this person has really good taste in plants because they use plants that I know. So I've gone with generally native prairie and meadow plants. So a lot of these are going to be familiar to people: black-eyed Susan, butterfly milkweed, wild bergamot, zigzag goldenrod, and Canada anemone. Everyone's seen these, your everyday person, so they're going to be comfortable with that. But there's some really cool, weird stuff that you can put in your garden too. So world milkweed, Asclepias versicolata, is about 6 to 8 inches tall. It doesn't look anything like the common milkweed that everybody's expecting. Prairie smoke, man, that it blooms very early and it looks weird. Rattlesnake master is one of my favorites too, and then spotted bee balm, not too dissimilar from its cousin, Monarda fistulosa, as well as bottle gentian. And bottle gentian never opens up. It's got this open or this closed look to it. So this is an opportunity, once you invite people into your garden with those more common plants, to say, hey, well, now that you're here, let me tell you about this. And then excite them in some of the garden that you've got there. So in terms of parting thoughts, we all need to find a balance between supporting pollinators and ecosystem restoration while keeping the peace with our neighbors and maintaining an expected aesthetic. And that's me. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, Kevin. That was wonderful. I mean, it was a really nice compliment to what Adele presented too. So absolutely wonderful to have that. So I'm wondering if we've got some questions, and I know that we had a couple of questions already submitted. One, yeah, where is it? Yes. Marion Williams was asking about, is there an organization that provides details or provides a course related to pollinator landscaping? She's got a new house, and she just purchased a new house with 1/2 an acre of space, and she wants to put a pollinator garden in the front. So I can leave it up to both of you to pop in and answer. Perhaps Adele, if you can think of something. Kevin, if you can think of something. I'll let you.
There are courses. You should check through the Ontario Agricultural College. They do have certification courses in landscape design, and they always do talk about pollinator plants. I've done extensive talks on healthy landscapes and native gardens. I mean, if you just Google that, organizations like you probably have had historically. I've done a number for Reap Green Solutions in Kitchener, and I know that Green Venture in Hamilton also has a whole series. So if you want an in-depth 1 hour long webinar, you can get that. More in depth, but for speaking for Ontario, University of Guelph does have stuff. Kevin, you would have some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, doing a plug for the Pollination Guelph website, there are tons of resources on there too, yeah. So you can learn at your own speed and take it in. And I guess one thing that, if anything good came out of the pandemic, is incredible amount of YouTube videos that help with this, including Pollination Guelph, on laying out a space, preparing a space, plant selection. So there are more resources than you can read in a lifetime. Again, then plus the ones that Corrine plugged, the books that are specific. Many of those books are divided almost in two, and the first part deals with here are the plants and here's what they attract, and then it flips on the other half and says, what do you want to attract? Well, here's what you want to plant.
Exactly. Those are the Heather Holm books. And what I also love about those is that if you're looking at the pollinator ones, the native pollinator book, it's divided into prairie habitat, woodland edge, and wetland edge. So depending on what the environment is. Another program that is sometimes offered through Royal Botanical Gardens is Landscape for Life. And it's actually a 4 or 5 sort of once a week program, and you come out of that with a garden plan. So but that doesn't happen every year, but that is one that is out there as well. I've got another question from Marion, and maybe it's for both of you too. How do pollinator plants become weeds? I'll let you field those ones. Kevin, so do you want to tackle that one first this time?
Yeah, that'd be fine. I mean, weed is almost similar to garbage. It's a personal perspective thing. Milkweed for years has been a banner child for agricultural weed. And now it's fallen into favor and understanding that it's actually really important, and we're allowing that to return. So there's some subjectivity to that question and answer. So I think obviously weeds are not going to be available in the nursery trade. It is not difficult for a desirable plant to become weedy, and Adele mentioned some of these, or poorly behaved, let's say. There's no fire and forget. I've been asked, I mean, myself, aren't you done gardening? And I said, well, no, when I'm done gardening, we move, because it's an ongoing thing, and it is nice to be able to have to go out and tend to the garden. So I hope that answers. Or Adele?
Yeah, well, a weed is a plant in the wrong place, right? And I think the way that we start with them is you check out what the noxious weeds are. Like, I thought Canada thistle was a beautiful plant. It's considered a noxious weed, and I live in the country, and you're obligated to get rid of it. You know, so if something is actually doing harm and misplacing something else, I would call that a weed. But as Kevin mentioned, names are powerful. Joe Pye weed is a spectacular ornamental milkweed. There are all kinds of plants that are called a weed, but they're not. It's just because they were always there. And, you know, let's face it, for many, many, many years, like hundreds of years, our go-to garden style has been that of the English country garden. And those plants aren't native here, you know, so everybody thinks lilac's a native plant. It's not. But we look at something like milkweed and we think that's horrible, whereas they'll plant goldenrod in England because they think it's really pretty, and it is. You know, so it's really a question of context.
Yeah, context and perception. Exactly.
Context and perception. Yeah.
So we've got one last question that I can see. It's from Sarah, and she asks, how can we protect pollinators during spring and fall garden cleanup to keep the neighbors happy? And Adele, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Kevin if Kevin wants to add anything to that. And I think that might be our last question before we have to go. Oh, we've got one more. Okay, we have one more question after that from Sarah also, and maybe this can be she wants to know about shady plants, or plants in shady areas, I should say. So keep the neighbors happy, spring and fall. plants?
Hold off as long as you possibly can. Hold off as long as you possibly can. And then if you cut back a little bit. So if you're doing a hollow stem plant like Joe Pye weed or the grasses, leave at least a foot. Okay, so there's still some protection there. So smile at your neighbors and trim some of it off, but still leave it for as long as possible until it's 10 to 15 degrees for a week. Is that what it is, Kevin? And in the fall, let them complain. You can explain it. I had an elderly gentleman complain about a corporate property that I was doing and why the leaves were still there in the fall. And I gave him all the data. I gave him the studies. I gave him everything. And he still said, well, I'm not convinced of that. So sometimes you just have to ignore it. I'm sorry. But as long as possible, delay in the spring. Words of wisdom, Kevin, you're the ecologist.
Yeah, I'd reflect that. Yeah, leave it up as long as you can. Leave as much as your neighbors or partner will tolerate. I mean, that seed continues, that's on whatever remaining rakeems or umbels is going to be feeding things through the winter time. So, and then as Adele mentioned, this chambered pith is going to be really important for things to burrow into to overwinter. So, yeah.
And what I've done for Sarah's question about plants that are in pollinator plants in shady areas, Heather Holmes' book has got some great suggestions, but there's also some great suggestions online that you might be able to find some stuff as well. And also the Circe's books there as well. So, I mean, there's so many good resources. And if I'm not mistaken, there may even be a sheet on Pollination Guelph resources. Yeah, so lots and lots of different things. So just because of time, could you provide this? Oh yeah, Holmes without the, Heather Holm, sorry, without the E or the S. So just HOLM, and then you'll see them on our website there. Oh, and look at their spring cleanup video by Pollination Guelph. There you go. So great. Thanks, Andelyn, for popping that in. So I'm just going to finish off a little bit to just remind people about our plant sale, and also don't forget about, whoops, Daisy. Yeah, don't forget about also not only the plant sale, but don't forget about the Bumblebee workshop that's happening June 24th. Don't forget, we're always looking for donations, and those donations help provide, that's what provides the plants that we use in our special projects. Also, that's what pays for our insurance, our website, guest speakers, outreach activities. So, if you can donate, wonderful. We're always looking for volunteers, and whether that is in the gardens or whether it is helping share the information with other people, also on our board of directors as well. Again, don't forget about the plant sale. And I would strongly suggest that you actually make a list of what you want before you go. Do a little bit of research. Things are all listed in alphabetical order, I believe by scientific name. Not common name. So I'm pretty sure that's the way, but know what you want before you go. There are the books that we were talking about. And this is the one, Pollinators and Native Plants. That's the one that's my go-to. And it will have some great suggestions. It even gives you some landscape suggestions about what you might do in those areas. And then let me just quickly put this here. So there we go. And I'm going to just finish off one more thing. Oopsie daisy, come on. And once again, I want to thank our sponsors, Abood Associates, Origin Native Plants, and Be Sweet Nature Company. They've been wonderful to help support our programs. And again, check out Abood and Associates. Check out their wonderful work that they're doing in so many different local areas, restoring different places. So just want to say happy spring to everybody. Thanks to Andelyn for your help and doing this together. Thanks to Adele Pierre and Kevin Butt for sharing their different perspectives of how we can turn landscape areas into spaces that are actually supportive of pollinators just by adding a little structure. And keeping the weird plants in there with the standard plants. So make, put a little imagination in there. Thanks to all Pollination Guelph volunteers who've helped to make this happen. As I said, to Andelin and to Nadine and other volunteers that are in the background, and to you for listening with us. We hope you take at least one piece of information you've learned tonight and share it with a friend, family member, or on social media. Don't forget to join our newsletter. That's where we're telling people lots of things that are happening. Follow us on social media, and we'll see you at our next event. So take care, everybody. Have a great evening, and maybe we'll see you again another time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks.